At her birthday dinner, my wife laughed. Introduce you to my friends? Please, I have a reputation to protect. I smiled and said, you don't have to protect it anymore. What I thought was going to be a celebration of my wife's 30th birthday turned into the moment I realized I'd been married to a stranger for 3 years. I arrived at Meridian Steakhouse in downtown Sacramento at exactly 7:30 p.m., the time Jessica had told me to meet her book club friends for dinner. The hostess looked confused when I mentioned the reservation under Jessica Mitchell. Oh, that party? They've been here since 5:30, she said, leading me through the dimly lit restaurant. I felt my stomach drop as I approached a large round table where 8 women were deep in animated conversation, wine glasses already emptied and refilled. Jessica looked up when I arrived, and I caught something flicker across her face, not happiness to see me, but annoyance. Ryan, you made it, she said with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. I leaned down to kiss her cheek, but she turned slightly so I caught mostly air. Sorry I'm late, I said, even though I wasn't. Traffic was heavier than expected. The women at the table had gone quiet, studying me with expressions I couldn't quite read. I recognized none of them despite Jessica talking about her book club constantly for the past year. Ladies, I'd like you to meet my husband, Ryan, I started, extending my hand to the woman closest to me. He's a software systems analyst and, actually, Jessica interrupted sharply, her voice cutting through the restaurant noise. Let's not do formal introductions right now. We were just getting to the good part of our discussion about Elena Ferrante. The woman I'd been reaching toward, a blonde in an expensive blazer, pulled her hand back with an awkward smile. Oh, okay, she said, glancing between Jessica and me uncertainly. I stood there for a moment, hands still extended, feeling heat creep up my neck. Well, maybe I should just grab a chair and, actually, Ryan, Jessica said, her voice taking on that sickeningly sweet tone she used when she was about to say something cutting. We've been having such a lovely girls' evening. You know how it is with book discussions, very intellectual, very focused. Maybe you'd be more comfortable at the bar? You could watch the game or something. The silence at the table was deafening. 8 women stared at their wine glasses, suddenly fascinated by the burgundy liquid swirling inside. I felt like I'd been slapped, but I kept my voice steady. Jessica, it's your birthday dinner. I thought the plan was for me to join you and to meet your friends. Well, she said, taking a long sip of wine, plans change. Besides, I have a reputation to protect here. She gestured vaguely at the women around the table. These are successful, sophisticated women. Authors, entrepreneurs, cultural influencers. They wouldn't really understand someone like you. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had just consumed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Someone like me. The man who paid for her designer clothes, her yoga classes, her endless book purchases. The man who supported her while she found herself through various artistic pursuits that never seemed to generate any income. I looked around the table at these supposedly sophisticated women, noting their designer handbags, their perfectly styled hair, their uncomfortable expressions. One woman in the corner, brunette with kind eyes, was shaking her head slightly, looking genuinely distressed by what she'd just witnessed. You know what, Jessica? I said quietly, reaching for my wallet. You're absolutely right. You do have a reputation to protect. I pulled out my credit card and handed it to our server, who had been hovering nearby pretending not to listen. I'd like to pay for the entire table, please. Make sure they get whatever they want for dessert and coffee. Jessica's face went pale. Ryan, what are you doing? I'm making sure your reputation stays intact, I said, signing the receipt for $847 without even looking at the total. You don't have to protect it anymore. Enjoy your evening, ladies. I walked out of that steakhouse with my head high, leaving behind 8 stunned women and a wife who was frantically texting my phone before I even reached the parking garage. But I was done answering her calls. For the first time in 3 years, I was done pretending that being treated like a dirty secret was normal in a marriage. I was sitting in my apartment at 11:47 p.m., staring at 17 unread messages from Jessica, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi Ryan, this is Grace from dinner tonight. the woman in the corner. Can we talk? It's important. I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the brunette with the kind eyes who'd looked genuinely upset during Jessica's public humiliation of me. Against my better judgment, I typed back, "What about?" Her response came immediately, "About Jessica. About what you don't know. I was kicked out of the book club 2 weeks ago for asking too many questions. Meet me at Denny's on J Street? I know it sounds crazy, but you need to see what I have." 20 minutes later, I was sliding into a booth across from Grace Patterson, a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. She was clutching a manila folder and a large coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she opened what appeared to be a carefully organized evidence collection. "I'm sorry about tonight," she said immediately. "What Jessica did to you was cruel, but it wasn't surprising. She's been systematically destroying your reputation in our group chat for months." She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots that made my blood run cold. Messages from Jessica in a group called Literary Ladies V painted a picture of me as a pathetic, clingy husband who was holding her back from her destined greatness. "He's so boring," read one message from 3 weeks ago. "Always wanting to stay home and watch Netflix instead of networking at important events. I swear he has no ambition whatsoever." Another from last month. Ryan asked if I wanted to plan a vacation together. Can you imagine? Planning a future with someone who peaked in college? I told him I was too busy with my writing projects. The worst one was from just 5 days ago. "I've been thinking about our conversation about successful women deserving successful partners. I think it's time I stopped settling. Life is too short to waste on someone who doesn't match your energy level." Grace scrolled through dozens of similar messages while I sat there feeling like I'd been gutted with a rusty knife. 3 years of marriage, and my wife had been conducting a character assassination campaign against me with women I'd never even met. "Grace," I said quietly, "why are you showing me this? What's your angle here?" She looked up from her phone with tears in her eyes. "Because Jessica destroyed my business reputation when I started asking questions about where the book club's money was actually going. Because she's not just humiliating you, she's stealing from you. And because she's planning to leave you the moment she finds someone she considers more worthy of her attention." Grace pulled out a printed bank statement that made absolutely no sense to me. "This is from a business account Jessica opened 6 months ago under something called Literary Consulting Solutions. She's been using your income information to secure business credit cards without your knowledge. 3 of them, totaling over $52,000 in debt." I stared at the papers, trying to process what I was seeing. That's impossible. I would have seen credit inquiries on my report. "Not if she's using your information cleverly," Grace said. "She listed you as a business partner and used your employment verification from your company's HR department. The applications show your salary as justification for the credit limits, but the cards are in the business name with her as the primary contact." My hands were shaking as I flipped through page after page of charges. Designer restaurants I'd never heard of, luxury boutiques, expensive wine purchases that explained how she was funding her sophisticated lifestyle while claiming to be a struggling writer. "There's more," Grace said softly. "Jessica has been selling items you've bought for her, jewelry, electronics, even furniture, and using the money to pay for group dinners and designer clothes to impress the book club women. She told us you were cheap and wouldn't support her social life, so she had to get creative with funding. The betrayal was so comprehensive, so calculated, that I felt physically sick. Every gift I'd given her, every thoughtful gesture, had been converted into cash to fund her secret life of impressing women who apparently thought I was a pathetic loser unworthy of introduction. "Why are you telling me this, Grace?" I asked again. "What happened 2 weeks ago that got you kicked out?" She took a deep breath and pulled out her phone again, scrolling to a recording app. "I recorded our last book club meeting when I confronted Jessica about some inconsistencies in her stories about you. She threatened to sue me for defamation and had me banned from the group. But Ryan, there's something else you need to know. Something that's going to change everything." Grace's eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and determination as she prepared to show me whatever evidence had gotten her expelled from Jessica's inner circle. "The book club isn't really a book club at all." I stared at Grace across the sticky Denny's table as she pulled out another folder, this one even thicker than the first. What do you mean it's not a book club? I asked, though part of me was already dreading the answer. Grace opened the folder and spread out what looked like business documents, contracts, and more bank statements. It's a pyramid scheme disguised as a literary society. Jessica has been recruiting aspiring female entrepreneurs and convincing them to invest in a fake publishing company called Enlightened Authors Press. She's earning commission from every woman she brings in. The documents showed a sophisticated operation that had been running for 8 months. Women were paying initial investments of $3,500 to $8,000 for publishing packages that promised to make them best-selling authors within 6 months. Jessica was positioned as a mid-level recruiter, earning 15% commission on every new member plus bonuses for hitting monthly targets. Look at this, Grace said, pointing to a spreadsheet on her laptop. Jessica's earned over $47,000 in commissions in the past 6 months alone. That's how she's been funding her lifestyle while telling you she's struggling financially. I felt my stomach drop as I recognized names on the client list, women from tonight's dinner, plus dozens of others I'd never heard of. Each had invested thousands of dollars based on Jessica's promises of literary success and financial independence. But here's the worst part, Grace continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. Jessica has been using your professional credibility to legitimize the scheme. She's been forging endorsement letters with your name and job title, claiming that as a systems analyst, you've verified the company's technology platform and business model. She showed me printed emails with my forged signature recommending Enlightened Authors Press as a revolutionary publishing platform with robust technical infrastructure. My supposed endorsement had been sent to dozens of potential investors, using my real job title and company name to add credibility to what was obviously a sophisticated scam. This is identity theft, I said, my voice barely controlled. She's been committing fraud using my name and professional reputation. It gets worse, Grace said grimly. Remember how Jessica volunteers at the Sacramento Public Library's fundraising committee? She's been embezzling money from their donor accounts. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $500 there, but it's escalated over the past 3 months. Grace pulled out bank statements showing transfers from the library's fundraising account to Jessica's personal checking account, totaling over $12,000 in stolen donations meant for literacy programs and children's book purchases. The deposits coincided perfectly with Jessica's expensive dinners and shopping sprees that I'd been wondering how she afforded. She set up automatic transfers disguised as administrative fees and program coordination costs, Grace explained. The library board hasn't noticed yet because Jessica volunteers to reconcile the books each month. She's been covering her tracks by manipulating the financial reports. I sat back in the booth, trying to process the scope of Jessica's criminal activity. Identity theft, embezzlement, running a pyramid scheme. My wife wasn't just lying to me about her feelings, she was a career criminal who'd been using our marriage as cover for multiple fraudulent operations. How did you figure all this out? I asked Grace. I'm a forensic accountant, she said with a bitter laugh. When Jessica started pressuring me to invest in Enlightened Authors Press, I did what I always do. I investigated the company's financials. Nothing added up. No real business address, no legitimate publishing history, no actual published authors. When I started asking questions in the book club, Jessica got defensive and accused me of being negative and unsupportive of other women's dreams. Grace showed me a recording from her phone of what appeared to be a heated confrontation. Jessica's voice was clear and angry. Grace, you're being paranoid and frankly jealous. Just because you're not ready to take risks and invest in your future doesn't mean you should sabotage other women who are brave enough to bet on themselves. Maybe this group isn't the right fit for someone with your limited vision. That was 2 weeks ago, Grace said. The next day, I got a text saying I was no longer welcome at book club meetings because my toxic energy was disrupting the group's positive momentum. But by then, I'd already gathered enough evidence to expose the whole operation. She pulled out her phone and showed me a contacts list with over 40 names. These are all the women Jessica has recruited or attempted to recruit in the past 8 months. Most of them have invested their life savings based on her promises. Some have taken out second mortgages or borrowed against their retirement accounts. The human cost of Jessica's fraud was staggering. Grace scrolled through testimonials from women who'd invested everything they had, believing they were purchasing their pathway to literary success and financial independence. Instead, they'd been systematically swindled by my wife and her network of co-conspirators. "Grace," I said slowly, "what exactly are you asking me to do with this information?" She looked directly into my eyes with an intensity that made me understand why Jessica had seen her as a threat. "I want your permission to expose Jessica publicly. The Sacramento Literary Society is having their annual fundraising gala next Friday. Jessica is scheduled to receive the Volunteer of the Year award for her work with the library's fundraising committee. 200 of the city's most prominent cultural leaders will be there, including several of her pyramid scheme victims who still don't know they've been scammed." Grace leaned forward, her voice urgent and determined. I want to stand up during her acceptance speech and present all this evidence to the entire literary community. Destroy her reputation the same way she destroyed yours, except with actual crimes instead of petty gossip. But I need your cooperation because some of this evidence involves identity theft using your name. I stared at the mountain of evidence spread across our table: bank statements, forged documents, recorded conversations, victim testimonials. Jessica hadn't just betrayed our marriage, she'd built an entire criminal enterprise while using me as both financial support and unwitting credibility. "What would you need from me?" I asked quietly. Grace smiled for the first time all evening, and it was absolutely terrifying in its determination. "Just show up to the gala and be ready to confirm that you never endorsed Enlightened Authors Press or authorized the use of your name in any business documents. Let me handle everything else." I spent the next week in a strange state of suspended reality, going through the motions of normal life while knowing that everything was about to explode. Jessica had been calling and texting constantly since the birthday dinner, alternating between apologies and accusations. "Ryan, I was stressed and had too much wine. You know how I get when I'm overwhelmed with work projects." Then an hour later, "You embarrassed me in front of my professional contacts." Some of those women could have been valuable networking opportunities. I ignored every message, but Grace kept me updated on her investigation. What she discovered in those final days before the gala was even more damaging than what she'd already shown me. The pyramid scheme was larger and more sophisticated than either of us had realized. Grace had traced Enlightened Authors Press to a network of similar fake publishing companies operating across 3 states, all run by the same criminal organization. Jessica wasn't just a mid-level recruiter, she was the West Coast Regional Coordinator, responsible for establishing new chapters and training other recruiters in the manipulation tactics that had proven so successful. "Look at this training manual I found on Jessica's cloud storage," Grace said during our meeting 2 days before the gala. She showed me a document titled Literary Dreams: Converting Passion into Profit, that read like a handbook for psychological manipulation. The manual taught recruiters how to identify vulnerable women going through life transitions, divorce, empty nest syndrome, career dissatisfaction, and exploit their insecurities to make them more susceptible to investment pressure. There were specific scripts for different personality types. For the intellectual type, you're clearly too smart to let fear hold you back from achieving the literary recognition you deserve. For the status-conscious type, successful women like you understand that investing in yourself is the ultimate luxury. For the financially struggling type, this is your chance to finally break free from the cycle of financial stress and create generational wealth through your writing. The manual even included techniques for isolating targets from family members who might ask skeptical questions about the investment. Jessica had been using these exact strategies on the women in her book club, systematically identifying their psychological weak points and exploiting them for financial gain. "But here's what really makes me sick," Grace said, pulling up another document. "Jessica has been specifically targeting women going through divorces or recent widowhood. She tells them that investing in their writing career is an act of empowerment and independence, then takes their settlement money or life insurance payouts. Grace showed me a client list with notes that made my stomach turn. Recent widow, $45,000 life insurance, very emotional about late husband's unfulfilled dreams. Bitter divorce, wants to prove ex-husband wrong about her potential, has $20,000 in settlement money. Empty nester, kids in college, feeling invisible and purposeless, desperate for validation. Jessica had been systematically preying on women during the most vulnerable moments of their lives, stealing their hope along with their money. The clinical calculation of it was breathtaking in its cruelty. "There's something else," Grace said quietly. "I found communications between Jessica and the pyramid scheme's leadership about expanding into elder fraud. They want her to start recruiting retired women with substantial savings accounts by promising them that publishing their memoirs will create a legacy for their grandchildren." I felt physically sick reading the proposed targeting strategies for elderly women. Jessica wasn't just stealing money, she was destroying people's final chances at financial security and emotional fulfillment. "Grace," I said, "this isn't just about exposing her anymore. People need to be warned before more victims get recruited." "That's exactly why I've been documenting everything so carefully," she replied. "I've already contacted the FBI's white-collar crime unit and the California Attorney General's office. They're building a case, but they need more evidence and victim testimony. The gala exposure will hopefully encourage more victims to come forward." Grace pulled out printed copies of forged documents that made me realize how deeply Jessica had involved me in her crimes without my knowledge. She had created fake business partnerships using my name, listing me as a co-founder of Literary Consulting Solutions and claiming I had provided the technical expertise for Enlightened Authors Press's publishing platform. "She's been telling investors that you designed their proprietary manuscript evaluation software," Grace explained. "According to these documents, you're supposedly the chief technology officer of the entire operation." My forged signature appeared on incorporation papers, business loan applications, and partnership agreements that would have made me legally liable for the pyramid scheme's debts and criminal activities if the fraud hadn't been discovered. Jessica had been systematically setting me up to take the fall if the scheme collapsed, positioning herself as merely a sales representative while making me appear to be the mastermind behind the technology that enabled the fraud. "The scariest part," Grace continued, "is that Jessica has been building this false narrative for months. If these documents were discovered without context, it would look like you were the criminal genius behind the whole operation while she was just an innocent wife who got manipulated by her husband." I stared at the papers with growing horror, realizing that Jessica hadn't just been stealing from me, she'd been constructing an elaborate frame job that would have destroyed my life completely. If Grace hadn't investigated the book club's finances, I could have faced federal charges for crimes I didn't even know were being committed. "She's been covering her tracks by making you the fall guy," Grace said. "Classic criminal strategy, always have someone else to blame when the scheme inevitably collapses." The night before the gala, Grace called with one final piece of evidence that changed everything. "Ryan, I need you to hear this recording. It's from last week's emergency book club meeting that Jessica called after your birthday dinner confrontation." The audio quality was poor, but Jessica's voice was unmistakable. "Ladies, we need to discuss the Ryan situation. Some of you seemed uncomfortable with how I handled things at dinner, but you don't understand the full picture. Ryan has been sabotaging my business opportunities for months because he's jealous of my success. He's threatened to expose our publishing program unless I give him a larger share of the profits." My blood ran cold as I listened to Jessica paint me as an extortionist trying to blackmail her literary society. "I've been protecting all of you from his demands, but after his behavior at dinner, I think it's time we considered more aggressive protective measures. Ryan knows about our investment structure and client lists. If he decides to retaliate against me personally, he could destroy everything we've built together." The recording continued with Jessica systematically poisoning the book club women against me, portraying herself as their protector and me as a vindictive threat to their financial dreams. She was preemptively establishing a narrative that would discredit anything I might say about her criminal activities. "Tomorrow night," Grace said grimly, "we're not just exposing a pyramid scheme. We're preventing Jessica from successfully framing you for her crimes." The Sacramento Literary Society's annual gala was exactly the kind of pretentious event Jessica lived for: crystal chandeliers, silk tablecloths, and 200 of the city's cultural elite mingling over champagne and self-congratulation. I arrived at the Hyatt Regency Ballroom wearing my best suit, carrying a manila envelope that contained copies of every piece of evidence Grace had gathered. Jessica was holding court near the silent auction tables, wearing a stunning black evening gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She looked radiant, confident, completely in her element as she charmed potential donors and posed for photos with the Literary Society's board members. When she spotted me across the room, her face went through a complex series of emotions: surprise, panic, calculation, then a forced smile as she excused herself from her conversation and walked over. "Ryan, I can't believe you came," she said, her voice bright but strained. "After our misunderstanding at dinner, I wasn't sure." "I wouldn't miss your big night," I replied calmly. "Volunteer of the Year is quite an honor. All that fundraising work for the library must have been really rewarding." Something flickered behind her eyes at my emphasis on the word fundraising, but she maintained her composure. "It really has been. Giving back to the community, supporting literacy programs, it's so important to use your platform for good, you know." The irony of her words was staggering. "Absolutely," I agreed. "I'm sure everyone here tonight would be fascinated to learn about your platform and how you've been using it." Jessica's smile became more strained. "Ryan, you're being weird. Is everything okay? You seem different." "I'm exactly the same person I've always been. Maybe you're just seeing me clearly for the first time." Before she could respond, the evening's program began. We took our seats at opposite ends of the room as the Literary Society's president began introducing the various award recipients. Grace was seated 3 tables away from me, looking calm but alert, her phone recording everything as planned. When they called Jessica's name for the Volunteer of the Year award, the applause was enthusiastic. She glided to the podium with practiced elegance, accepting the crystal plaque with tears in her eyes that looked completely genuine. "This honor means more to me than I can express," Jessica began, her voice trembling with emotion. "When I first started volunteering with the library's fundraising committee, I never imagined it would become such a passion. Knowing that my efforts have helped purchase books for children who might not otherwise have access to literature, that my work has supported literacy programs that change lives, it's incredibly humbling." The audience was captivated by her sincerity. She spoke beautifully about the importance of community support, the power of literature to transform lives, and her commitment to continuing her fundraising efforts for years to come. If I didn't know what I knew, I would have been moved by her speech. "Literature has always been my first love," Jessica continued, "and I'm excited to announce that I'll be expanding my community service by helping other aspiring writers achieve their publishing dreams through a new mentorship program I've developed." My stomach clenched as I realized she was using her award speech to recruit new pyramid scheme victims. She was standing at a podium, being honored for her community service, while actively planning to defraud the very people applauding her. "I believe every woman has a story worth telling," Jessica said, "and I'm committed to helping them find the confidence and resources to share those stories with the world. Because when women support women, amazing things happen." The applause was thunderous. Jessica stood there glowing, basking in the adoration of 200 people who had no idea they were clapping for a career criminal. That's when I stood up. The applause died quickly as I walked toward the front of the room, my footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent ballroom. Jessica's face went white as she realized what was happening. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying clearly without a microphone. "I'm Ryan Mitchell, Jessica's husband. I have something important to share about my wife's volunteer work and mentorship programs." The audience murmured with confusion and anticipation. Jessica gripped the podium so tightly her knuckles went white. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, pulling documents from my envelope, "my wife has indeed been very active in fundraising. Unfortunately, she's been fundraising for herself by embezzling money from the library's donation accounts." The gasps were audible throughout the ballroom. Jessica stepped back from the microphone, shaking her head frantically. "She's also been operating a pyramid scheme called Enlightened Authors Press, using forged documents with my name to defraud aspiring writers out of their life savings. The mentorship program she just announced is actually a recruitment strategy for her next wave of victims. I held up bank statements and pointed to specific tables in the audience. Mrs. Henderson at table 12, you invested $8,000 last month based on my wife's promises. Mrs. Rodriguez at table 7, she took $6,500 from your divorce settlement. The list goes on. The room erupted in shocked conversations as women began recognizing their names and realizing they'd been scammed. Jessica grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. These are lies. Ryan is having a mental breakdown. He's been threatening me for weeks, trying to extort money from my business associates. Security should remove him immediately. But Grace was already walking toward the front of the room with her own folder of evidence. I'm Grace Patterson, a forensic accountant who was expelled from Mrs. Mitchell's book club for asking questions about where investment money was actually going. I have recorded conversations, bank statements, and victim testimonials that prove every word Mr. Mitchell just said. The Literary Society's president took the microphone, his face pale with shock. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to need to suspend this evening's program while we sort out these very serious allegations. Jessica made one last desperate attempt at control. This is a coordinated attack on my reputation by my vindictive husband and a disturbed woman who was jealous of our book club's success. Don't let them destroy what we've built together. But it was too late. Women throughout the ballroom were pulling out their phones, comparing notes about their investments, realizing they'd all been told the same lies by the same woman. The Volunteer of the Year had just been exposed as a criminal in front of the entire Sacramento literary community. The aftermath of the gala moved faster than I could have imagined. Within 48 hours, Jessica was arrested at our apartment on charges of embezzlement, identity theft, and operating an illegal investment scheme. The Sacramento Police Department's white-collar crime unit had been building their case for weeks based on Grace's evidence, and the public exposure at the gala gave them the final push they needed to make arrests. I watched from my office window as they led Jessica away in handcuffs, her designer clothes wrinkled and her perfect composure finally cracked. She looked up at me with an expression of pure hatred, as if I had orchestrated her downfall rather than simply exposed crimes she'd been committing for months. The local news picked up the story immediately, running headlines about Literary Society scandal and fake book club pyramid scheme. Jessica's mugshot appeared on every Sacramento news channel, along with phone numbers for victims to call if they'd been defrauded by Enlightened Authors Press. My phone started ringing within hours of Jessica's arrest. Grace had given my contact information to the FBI's Victim Assistance Coordinator, and dozens of women wanted to share their stories about how Jessica had stolen their money and dreams. Mrs. Chen had mortgaged her house to invest $15,000 in what Jessica promised would be a guaranteed bestseller package. Maria Rodriguez had used her entire divorce settlement, believing Jessica's claims that successful women invest in themselves. The most heartbreaking call came from an 82-year-old widow named Dorothy who had given Jessica $22,000 from her late husband's life insurance, thinking she was funding the publication of their love story. She made me feel like I was finally doing something meaningful with Harold's memory, Dorothy said through tears. She said our story would inspire other couples and that I'd earn enough royalties to leave money for my grandchildren. Each conversation made me realize how calculating Jessica's psychological manipulation had been. She hadn't just stolen money, she'd exploited people's deepest hopes and vulnerabilities for personal gain. The legal proceedings moved surprisingly quickly. Jessica's court-appointed attorney tried to negotiate a plea bargain within 2 weeks of her arrest, but the evidence was overwhelming. Grace's methodical documentation had created an airtight case that included recorded conversations, forged documents, bank records, and testimony from over 30 victims. The most damaging evidence came from Jessica's own digital footprint. Her laptop contained detailed spreadsheets tracking victim psychology, recruitment strategies, and profit margins that read like a manual for financial predation. She had literally categorized her victims by vulnerability level and earning potential. My divorce attorney was amazed by how straightforward the proceedings became once the criminal charges were filed. Usually these cases involve lengthy disputes over asset division, he explained. But when one spouse is facing federal fraud charges, the court tends to protect the innocent party's interests. The judge froze all of Jessica's assets pending restitution payments to her victims and ruled that I bore no financial responsibility for debts incurred through her criminal activities. My credit report was cleared of all unauthorized accounts, and the forged business partnerships were legally dissolved. 3 months after the gala, Jessica accepted a plea bargain that included 2 years probation, 1,000 hours of community service, and full restitution to all identified victims. The prosecutor had offered the relatively lenient sentence in exchange for Jessica's cooperation in dismantling the larger pyramid scheme network she'd been part of. She provided information that led to arrests in Nevada and Arizona, Grace explained when we met for coffee after the sentencing hearing. Apparently there were regional coordinators running similar schemes in multiple states. The FBI estimates they defrauded over $2 million from aspiring writers across the West Coast. Grace had become the unofficial leader of the victim support group that formed after Jessica's arrest. She was helping people navigate the restitution process and providing financial counseling for those who'd lost their life savings. Her forensic accounting skills had made her invaluable to both the FBI investigation and the civil lawsuits that followed. "How are you holding up?" Grace asked, studying my face with the analytical intensity I'd grown to appreciate. "Honestly, I feel like I dodged a bullet," I said. "If you hadn't investigated the book club, I could have ended up facing criminal charges myself based on those forged documents." "You were lucky," she agreed. "Jessica was systematically setting you up to take the fall. The fake business partnerships, the forged endorsements, the identity theft, it was all designed to make you look like the mastermind if the scheme collapsed." 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I realized that Grace and I had been spending more time together than either of us had initially planned. What started as case debriefings had evolved into genuine friendship, then into something deeper that neither of us wanted to rush given the circumstances of how we'd met. A year after the gala, I was sitting in a federal courthouse watching Jessica give her final victim impact statement as part of her sentencing requirements. She looked genuinely remorseful as she apologized to Dorothy, the 82-year-old widow whose life savings she'd stolen, but I couldn't tell if the tears were real or just another performance. "I know my actions caused tremendous pain," Jessica said, her voice barely audible. "I lost sight of basic human decency in pursuit of a lifestyle I couldn't afford. There's no excuse for what I did to people who trusted me." The judge sentenced her to complete her community service at a nonprofit financial literacy center, helping low-income families understand predatory lending schemes. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom that Jessica would spend the next 2 years educating people about exactly the kind of fraud she'd perpetrated. My own life had transformed completely during those 12 months. The experience with Jessica had taught me to recognize manipulation tactics and value genuine transparency in relationships. More importantly, it had connected me with Grace, whose analytical mind and unwavering integrity had become the foundation for something I'd never experienced before, a partnership built on complete honesty. Grace and I had started dating officially 6 months after my divorce was finalized, taking things slowly and deliberately. There were no hidden agendas, no financial games, no pretense about who we were or what we wanted. She insisted on splitting every dinner check, paid her own bills, and actually seemed interested in my work rather than just my income potential. "I love how your mind works," she told me one evening as we reviewed financial documents for another fraud case she was consulting on. "You see patterns in data the same way I do. It's like we speak the same analytical language." The fraud detection software I developed at work had become a major success after I incorporated lessons learned from Jessica's schemes. My company promoted me to senior systems architect, and the software was now being used by banks across California to identify identity theft and document forgery patterns. Grace had started her own forensic accounting firm specializing in pyramid scheme investigations, using her experience with Jessica's case to help other fraud victims recover their losses. We'd become an unofficial team, combining my technical skills with her financial expertise to assist law enforcement and civil attorneys. Last month, We testified together in a federal case against the Enlightened Authors Press Network leaders. Our combined evidence helped secure convictions that shut down similar schemes across 3 states and recovered over $1.8 million for victims. The most satisfying moment came when Dorothy called to tell us she'd received her full restitution payment and was finally able to publish her late husband's memoir through a legitimate publisher. Through our victim support group, Grace had connected her with a nonprofit that helps seniors share their stories, and Dorothy's book about Harold's World War II service was now being distributed to local libraries. "You too saved my faith in people," Dorothy said during our last phone call. "After what Jessica did, I thought everyone was just trying to take advantage of old folks like me. But you showed me there are still good people who care about doing the right thing." Grace and I got engaged 6 months ago, not with some elaborate proposal that could be posted on social media, but during a quiet conversation about our shared future while reviewing case files at her kitchen table. We're planning a small wedding next spring, with Dorothy as our honorary grandmother and several of the fraud victims we've helped as guests. Jessica never tried to contact me after her sentencing, but mutual acquaintances told me she'd moved back to her hometown and was working at a call center while completing her community service requirements. I genuinely hoped she'd learned from the experience and found a way to rebuild her life without deceiving people. My birthday dinner humiliation had led to the discovery of crimes that could have destroyed my life and the lives of dozens of innocent women. But it also led me to Grace, to meaningful work fighting financial fraud, and to a relationship built on the kind of mutual respect and transparency I'd never known was possible. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best discoveries about what you actually deserve.